All right, looks like we're recording, and I am very excited to have on the program Jack Higgs. Jack, welcome to the program. For those of you who don't know who Jack Higgs is, which is probably going to be a very small number of people who actually follow my channel, Jack is an incredible activist in Australia, been doing amazing street outreach, and just some of the most intense protests that I've ever seen have been either you on filming it or the one on the other side of the camera getting attacked, all sorts of things. And in fact, we were going to be doing the interview yesterday, but you were going to be going into the police station because you and your partner Tash have recently been assaulted. And it's just been an incredible, I can't imagine what it must be like to wake up as Jack Higgs every day. And um, for better or for worse, like you've got this incredible life now. And let's just start there, but make sure do a little intro to make sure that I didn't miss anything important.
No, yeah, well, thank you for having me on, Jeremy. Yeah, look, yeah, you could say that the last few years being an activist alongside my partner Tash Peterson have been intense, lots of ups and lots of downs. But yeah, it's just become life, really. It's one of those things where it just feels normal. I mean, I always hear from outsiders that things look hectic, and yes, they are. And unfortunately, there's been lots of police encounters, court proceedings, etc., etc. But yeah, essentially, I am a animal rights activist. I work closely with my partner Tash Peterson. We do protests. We mostly go out and do outreach now. Um, and yeah, social media is the main form the main medium that we convey our message to an audience, and that's really it, And then a lot of stuff kind of goes on in between there.
Yeah. Well, so as I mentioned, I've just seen some incredibly intense protests that you've been
Mm.
involved with. And I mean, like, a lot of activists that I meet, it's like they imagine protests getting to the level of the protests that they see that you're involved with. But for most people, it doesn't get to that level of intensity. Why do you think it is that you just seem to be like a magnet for this? Is it Tash or what is it? Like, I just can't, sometimes I can't fathom the amount
Mm.
of backlash that you receive.
It's yeah, that's an interesting observation. It is the case. I believe that we do seem to get a disproportionate amount of attention, good and bad, to our activism, I would say. I think it's a combination of factors. I think living here in Western Australia specifically, we do seem to get a certain type of reaction from the type of people that live here. It's our culture. I've discussed this with Wayne before, but I don't know what it is exactly. But there is something about the type of people that live here, and we like to call it the Wild West of Australia.
Mm,
Our laws have been said to be quite draconian. We're quite regressive in some things around like rights, like human rights even, and kind of their freedom of speech and stuff like that. Obviously, we live in an amazing country, an amazing state, and the freedom we have is, you know, I can't complain, but I do believe our environment has a factor in terms of the type of negative reaction we get.
mm,
Um, Also, the big one is that, yes, Tash Peterson being the personality she is, the kind of the freight train of an activist she is, and being really the only prominent activist here in Western Australia, and on her level, really Australia. I mean, we've had a lot of good Australian activist exports. Joey Carbstrong, we've had James Aspey, um,
mm.
and but they're overseas really, and Tash is really the one doing a lot of the work here in Australia. And it's not to downplay what other activists are doing in Australia. We have an amazing community around Australia, but yes, put it simply, Tash is a freight train.
Yeah, yeah.
And she gets a lot of attention. The media love reporting on her, and yes, all of this I think creates a cooking pot that results in a type of reaction we get when we're out in public, good and bad. Yeah.
Yeah, and the recent events that have been happening, where I guess it's been Tash getting assaulted, where people have thrown drinks at her
Mm,
on several different occasions. Um, I was just talking with another activist about that very thing, and we were noting how it seems to be that people are sort of forgetting that you and Tash are people, flesh and blood
mm,
people. That this impacts, that it affects, it hurts in some cases, and I don't want to paint you as weak or as a victim, because you're certainly not. You've handled everything with real strength and courage, in my opinion. But yeah, it's, I mean, what would you say to people who are, like, when they see you on the street and they're like, oh, this is an opportunity to you know troll or to do
mm.
something like that? What would you say to those people?
Yes. Well, look, we get a mix of reactions when we go out into public now, but and it's an interesting thing. So if we're just going to look into the recent case where we were assaulted out in Perth City, it was only the week before that Tash and I were out and we went to like a small music festival thing, and we got a lot of positive interactions, really only positive interactions from non-vegans of the public that know us. And yeah, it was yeah, uplifting in a way. It was quite nice to be able to speak to people that we don't know, that aren't even vegan, but just still have nice things to say about us, despite still maybe not being vegan or maybe disagreeing on some things. But then to go a week later and going out and doing outreach, and yes, you always get the type of negativity where somebody will shout something as they walk past, something
Hmm.
derogatory, something negative. You brush it off, whatever. If they're just kind of walking past and say something, there's no point really getting too worked up about it. But yeah, it seems to just be lately things are amplifying a little bit, especially when we're doing something as passive as outreach. We're not out there protesting. We're literally just speaking to people, and then yeah, you have this. First of all, before the assault happened, about an hour earlier, some younger 18-year-old, gosh, sorry, I don't know her age, but she looks like she's around the 18
Hmm.
bracket, threw a full McDonald's drink over Tash's back. An hour later, we're now going to sit down for dinner, and yeah, another woman has come in and splashed Tash entirely, and been quite enraged as well. She could have been a little bit drunk because we were in the city, the party center of the city. Um, yeah, and then yeah, that's at that point. We're a bit over it. We're
Yeah.
definitely over it. It's been years now of being assaulted, and the
Hmm.
police not really doing anything about it. Really,
Yeah.
no, I don't think anyone has actually been convicted of some type of assault or battery. And so, yeah, subconsciously things build up and you go and you confront that person this time. And then what happens is, especially when you're dealing with drunk people, someone has now come up and king hit me from the side trying to split up a confrontation.
Oh,
So yeah,
wow.
things are, yeah, yeah. So things are getting much more amplified, and we have to be a lot more careful. Yeah, so
Mm.
I'm sorry, I don't specifically remember your initial question, but I'm gonna
Yeah,
just
I'm not sure if I do either.
but no, I just
Well,
wanted to elaborate on the type of negativity we are facing now.
does it affect how you go out? Like, for instance, like, have you
Mm,
considered going out maybe with some big guys around you, like
mm.
protection, or is it typically you and Tash going out, just the two of you?
Yeah, no, typically it's just us going out. We
Hmm.
have definitely thought about having some type of bodyguard with us, even if we have to pay somebody or we have some type of friend. It's hard to actually get a hold of somebody, but
Mm.
yeah, we're at this point now where we have to really be careful. I mean, and I think considering some type of physical presence is going to be important depending on the location we're in. There are certain locations where I wouldn't be concerned. Like we go and do outreach at the beach
Yeah.
during the day. I really don't see something that serious happening. It's more so when you're in the city and you're dealing with certain types of people. It's
Mm.
uh, it's definitely a cooking pot of an area where you get. I mean, that's the same for most major cities around the world. Is when you're actually in the city center, you're going to get the most type of extreme personalities coming out. Um, But no, yeah, we're definitely going to have to look into having some type of protection for certain environments for sure.
Yeah, I mean, looking back over your content over the years, I've been watching you for, I guess, 2 or 3 years now.
Hmm.
And over the course of that time, whether it's you or on Tash's channel, I've seen Tash get, grabbed, basically like someone gave her a wedgie. I've seen that guy with the whip,
Hmm.
basically like nearly hit her. And I've seen you be lifted up in that one. So you like people are putting their hands on you a
Oh
lot.
yeah.
Or yeah, and it's interesting because here you are speaking out for the animals, for their right to bodily autonomy, and pretty consistently getting your own bodily autonomy violated in many respects.
Mm.
um and so you would say that this has been an escalation, even looking back at incidents like the whip and that kind of thing. This is still seeming to like amp up a little bit.
Yes, yeah. Ugh. It's one of those things where things are just now starting to seemingly amplify. And yes, it has been like this since the beginning, really. Even 3.5 years ago when we first started doing this style of activism together, straight off the bat we were getting physical physical backlash.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's hard to say that it's increased, but I think people are getting more and more confidence that they can do something. They can come up and physically touch us and assault us and get away with it. I mean, the
Mhm.
more often people do it and the police do not respond, like the more likely I think people are going to be comfortable getting away with it and doing it. Like even
Mhm.
just like you said, to name a few examples, was the guy with the whip that's come up to us, but I think he's a bit of an outlier because we learnt in that altercation that he's a bit mentally unstable himself. But nevertheless, he obviously knew Tash, and he probably had his feelings. The recent, well, not the recent, a year ago now, a
Mhm.
protest when we did it at the butcher's. I got chased around the store, and we've done it at that butcher's multiple times. So the more
Mhm.
often you go back to a particular place, they feel like, well, let's step it up. Let's get him. And even in that case, it was interesting how they really didn't even bother with Tash at all. And they decided to chase me around the shopping center and lift me up and damage my gear and push me in the back. And then the more recent one, when we went to the Royal Agricultural Show, where a security guard who was actually a big troll of ours online actually came up behind and put me in a headlock and dragged me to the floor and was
Mhm.
trying to damage my camera gear. So, yes, I think people are getting more and more comfortable violating us. The more presence we get in mainstream media and in social media, the more of the larger our voice gets. It's like the larger their reaction has to be. And I think it's really boiling down to a subconscious thing on their behalf. I really feel like this guilt can turn to violence.
Yeah, yeah. It can often lead to like sort of a verbally violent reaction, which I've
Yep.
seen. I haven't seen as much of the physical stuff that you have seen. I wonder if they're starting to feel more emboldened because they're seeing that when you have gone to the authorities, quite often they've either done nothing or sort of turned around and come after you for something. And
Yes.
are there some specific example? I didn't go back through in the last few days over videos, but I remember seeing over the years, I think Tash talking about maybe the fire restaurant episode
Oh, yeah.
where I think didn't y'all go to the authorities and try to report that you were assaulted and nothing came of that?
No, yeah, that's right. Yeah, we went to the police and we tried to file assault because yeah, I mean, people can go back and watch the video, but I was chased around, grabbed. Tash was, held by the neck, just kind of unreasonable force to remove protesters. And yeah, people watch the video because even I'm
Hmm.
mind
Hmm.
blanking on some of the specifics. But yeah, you go to the police and it turns around on us. And,
Hmm.
we get all the repercussions. He gets the I actually can't speak about too many specifics.
Hmm. Yeah, no worries.
Um, because
Yeah,
a
and we can
violence
take out
restraining,
anything.
yeah,
Yeah.
sure. We may or may not have to. We can look into it, but
Okay.
essentially, a violence restraining order has been placed on me. It just came to
Oh,
me. I
wow.
always forget. It's so silly that I forget. Um, and Tash too, but Tash was able to get it dropped.
Mm.
Um, yeah, to say the least, the repercussions are put back on us. I think if I'm not naming names right now, I should be good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it seems to me, I'm in the United States, so I don't consume Australian media, but it sure seems like you're quite famous in Australia. So, like for instance, you mentioned Wayne. I've lived with Wayne, worked with Wayne. We can go out and about, and it may be that people in the movement will recognize Wayne, but it's very seldom that we'll be out and about that someone will approach. It seems like that would happen to you and Tash quite a bit, as you just mentioned.
Mm.
A lot of non-vegans. Is that the case? Like when you leave the house, are you getting recognized all the time, or what?
Yeah, relatively so. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. Yeah.
It's hard to compare her with anybody else that would also be considered a celebrity figure. But yeah,
Mm.
like we just have to go out to the city to do outreach. We don't, and people just come up to us because they know us and they know we do interviews. We go to, if we're going past and picking up food from somewhere. Sometimes they want to get selfies. We went and spoke to lawyers the other day, and the assistant there wanted to get a selfie with Tash, and just everybody of every walk of life. A percentage of everybody seems to know Tash, and therefore myself as well.
Hmm.
It's pretty crazy. I mean, it's been like that for the entire time that we've been in a relationship, because it was really set off from Tash's early activism, especially when she ran onto a football field, and that got on, a lot of media attention. And
Hmm.
there's just been a consistent bout of prominent protests and events that have happened because of what Tash has been doing that gets media attention, and she's just been consistently in the media and just known. And then that's not even considering social media, where she probably has uh if not the most or the second most of any type of animal rights activist on YouTube in terms of views. Like she's got like 150 million. So, and
Hmm.
all of
Hmm.
those are not vegans.
Hmm.
The vast majority. It'd be nice to know a percentage, but you're probably looking at 90. Well, almost all of those views. So yes, a lot of people just know of Tash because of the type of content she makes, and it's pretty crazy. It is pretty crazy,
Yeah.
but as the theme of this conversation is going, it brings good and bad. It can
Good and
bring a lot
bad.
of
Yeah.
positivity, and the main goal of our activism is to get the message as far widespread as possible, and that's
Yeah.
succeeding. But it brings potential negativity and danger.
Yeah, in some cases danger, and of course, like I'm trying to be careful to just not paint you like victims or anything like that. You sometimes you're victimized, but I don't want to insinuate that it's stopping you or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
um yeah, I have a lot of gratitude towards you and Tash, because it is it seems that in the animal rights movement, we all get some level of hatred, but it seems that you two in particular take on such a bulk of the hatred. And that really does mean, like, as you've sort of alluded to, that you're reaching non-vegans, because our content is really like my content so far. I'm the vast majority is just going to be reaching people in the animal rights movement. And that's great. It's good support for other activists and stuff like that. But we really want to be doing what you're doing. But yeah, it does come with such a cost. You seem to handle it very well. I don't know if you're just externally calm. That seems to be your demeanor, but you definitely present that way. Um,
Mm.
so do you feel that way the majority of the time? And if so, like where does that confidence, that cool attitude come from? Like because you just seem very level and able to deal with it, and you can see it in real time when you're doing your street activism. Like you mentioned, people seeing you. I just watched one very recently that you did where somebody walked up. it was well, it was Tash, but they were like, "Are you Tash Peterson?" And then started trolling you guys, and just happens all the time. Yeah.
Oh
So
yeah, it does. It does. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Yes, I am a overall very calm person, can deal with stressful situations very well, and I think that's
mm,
why I've been good for the job filming Tash over the years. But no doubt the stress builds up, and I've had many dark holes of like just burning out and all those types of things. And I think as the
mm,
years have progressed, I've got more. I've become better at handling the stressful situations. But actually, I'm very prone to anxiety. In my
mm,
childhood, I've had panic attacks quite a lot, and it's an interesting thing because I can go from extreme anxiety and stress and sometimes panic. It's very rare where I have a panic attack now, very rare. And but also still be very, very calm. A lot of it's internalized for me. And in fact, when I used to go out, sorry, not used to, when I go out and film Tash's protests, I say used to because a lot of the protests were done earlier on
mm.
in our activism career. Oh yeah, I'd be super nervous, lump in my throat, like just hate it. I hate it. But but I also had to do it. Like there was no question about it. I love it at the same time. I'm
Yeah.
very much um, attracted to chaos, but also very affected by it. I think it's the feeling of I think it's the extremeness of it. It's almost like an adrenaline junkie thing. I'm not an adrenaline junkie, but
Mm,
I think that's the closest analogy of getting well, it's obviously you always have the animals in your mind, so that's why I wouldn't to ever turn down these prospects of doing these intense protests and putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. But at the same time, I do have a personal attraction to it, and I'm able
mm.
to handle it externally very well, despite internally actually being quite anxious and stressed at times.
Interesting. And has it changed over the years? Has it gotten more comfortable or less comfortable? I guess with the escalation, parts of it are getting more uncomfortable, but in terms of your ability to deal with it, have you gotten better at it?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that comes with age and experience. I mean, I started doing this. I became an activist when I was about 18 or 19.
Mm,
That was more kind of dabbling in the occasional outrage, joining some group stuff. But then, I officially started doing everything with Tash when I was almost 21, and for a few years there, also battling quite. I had a lot of anxiety in me, and potentially you could say some type of trauma that was leading to anxiety that I have dealt with over the years. And what I will say
mm,
now is, what's that? That's like what 4 years, almost 5 years later of or 7 years if you're really going to include from the beginning of doing activism. I've become much more confident. Like I
mm.
I don't sometimes appreciate how much confidence I have now as compared to the beginning of my activism, and just being able to be quite steadfast in my message, my approach, and how I handle situations. The stress doesn't, the anxiousness, the nervousness doesn't officially ever go away. I don't think
Mhm,
it ever will. We still get Tash and I still get nervous when we're discussing a potential protest where we anticipate a certain response. We still get nervous. We still get anxious about it, but you get skilled at it. You just
mhm.
get
Yeah,
skilled. You know how to approach it. You felt this before. It's like people probably always will get some type of stage fright, even if they're a public speaker, or stage nervousness. But you just know how to get through it, and you just know that
right.
it's going to disappear when you're there. And that actually is the case. You put yourselves in these stressful situations, and actually, when you're there doing it now, it kind of disappears. And when it's finished and nobody's severely hurt,
Hmm.
which has been 90% of the case at times, except for very, very recent times. You actually feel really good after it because you know you've done something very powerful, and you get this massive sense of relief. And I imagine chemically it's probably a release of serotonin or something, and you feel
Hmm.
amazing. And it's this, you know, it's going to pay off kind of thing, but there's always a risk.
Yeah, I think most people would concur with you on that. That any
Mm.
time of intense activism they've done, like it's leading up to it that you feel all the nerves.
Oh
Once you're
yeah,
in the moment, something clicks, you're just ready. You're just
yeah,
in game mode or something.
that's
Well,
right.
I can see how the two of you complement each other really well, and
Mm.
I can only imagine that it's sort of your calm presence was perfect for Tash,
Yes.
especially early on in your relationship, as she was like really sort of already someone with a lot of fame and notoriety at that point. And I should say, it seemed like at first, like some people like kind of like are a shadow of their partners. And it seemed like maybe at the beginning, like, oh, there's this guy, Jack. You can see him sometimes in the films and stuff. And like he's obviously like the person behind the camera, but you've really stepped out in front of the camera quite a bit and made quite a name for yourself, I think. So what's that been like? Like, because
Mm.
I guess at first, like there's some sort of comfort, I guess, in being the more anonymous one. And now that you're sort of more out front doing a lot of your own debates and things like that, things have changed a little bit, I guess.
Yes, yes. No, you're right in saying that we complement each other, and I'm quite the shadow personality of Tash in a way. Obviously, we share a lot of similarities and obviously values, uh, but in terms of personality, we're very opposite in many ways. Tash is actually it's an interesting thing. Tasha's more comfortable. She's a more, and this is just a personality trait. I would say she's more disagreeable, and I'm much more agreeable, which means that I kind of really want to avoid conflict and try to negotiate things and kind of get on people's side in a way. And that's not always the case. And it's not always the case for Tash. Tash actually doesn't like conflict in many situations as well, especially in like more personal, social situations. But when it
Mm,
comes to getting out a message to people of the public, it's like all of it. There's none of that with Tash. She just does not care how people perceive her. Whereas I have a level of like kind of self-awareness, like self-anxious, like anxiety that kind of stops me from doing the same things that Tash can do quite comfortably. But then again, that's a bit of a seesaw as well. Like I can be like Tash in other situations, and Tash can be much more subdued in other situations. But overall, you're right. We do complement each other very well, and I think that's where a lot of our success together as activists has been. But yeah, and then over the years, I've found my strengths as an activist, and even that complements Tash. Like I would say because I'm much more agreeable, I'm much more sociable in certain ways. I can have a different style when it comes to outreaching, or
mm,
I don't really protest because again that's something I struggle with, and I've attempted it, like doing a solo protest or something like that. I still struggle with that. It doesn't come naturally to me, and I accept that. But I think I'm a very good speaker. I think I get on with people really well, and I think that's where I've thrived as an activist. And again, that complements Tasha's strengths. So yeah, I'm leaning into that. I want to broaden my social media presence and find the avenues that I can do and try to make a living doing that as well.
mm.
So yeah, I think I'm finding my way, and I think it actually works really well in our actual relationship and our working relationship.
Yeah. Well, I think a great example of that is that 2v2 debate you guys did with that farmer.
Yeah,
If yeah, you remember the one I'm talking about?
yeah.
You and Tash sitting side by side. How did it feel to be doing a debate with your partner like right next to you? Was there a different feel to that when did you feel like more comfortable, more confident because you guys were a team?
Yeah, yeah. That was like my first official debate, especially in a public setting like that. And so yes, I was nervous. I didn't even know. I didn't even know what I know and what I feel comfortable actually saying in a public audience and on camera that's going to be probably presented to a lot of people online. But Tash really kind of took the dominant role there, and she did brilliantly, and I find that I was able to compliment her in certain ways. And you can probably see that in the debate. And I think that that's actually a scenario, a good example of where you see us working really well together. But even since then, things have evolved quite a lot. In fact, if we were to do the same thing again, it would probably be more 50-50 now. But I think with that farmer's personality, it was very well suited to Tash's approach. It was a much more like staunch, direct, you know, it was, you can probably get what I'm saying. Whereas if it goes into much more kind of, I don't know what the word is, a much more kind of debate based on facts and arguments and much more of a formal debate, maybe in that circumstance, Tash would want to pass it on to me a little bit more now. Not that I consider myself a formal debater, but I think we're very intuitive in terms of how we assess situations and who should take the role. And even when we're doing outreach in public, Tash will be very quick to say, here, Jack, you take over here, or I can even pass something on to her. We can figure it out.
Yeah, I've never had that where, like, you know, I've dated somebody where they were a fellow activist, and I imagine that it just offers a huge benefit because the person knows you so well that, you guys know each other's strengths, your weaknesses, and so you can, like, as you mentioned, like, pass things off. That debate is a great example of where if you felt nervous, you did not appear nervous at all. Yeah, I
did, yes.
From my memory. So, and you're right, that also from memory, I remember that farmer ended up saying a lot of things that made him look very callous, and I think lost a lot of people that would have been on his side. So yeah, whatever you guys did to draw that out of him, well done.
Yeah, and look, we would have. I would say that if we were to do it now, we would probably take a different approach, and we would have loved to do a round 2 with that farmer specifically. But I would say initially our goal with that one was just to convey a strong animal rights message, regardless of who the opponent was. But also, there's the common lie that all farmers seem to have, where they, you know, this whole humane lie, and they're not transparent about their practices and what they actually do to animals. So our goal was just to get him to admit that. And there were a few times where I did take the microphone off Tash and ask him a question, because I knew I could tell when maybe Tash was missing it, he was specifically avoiding a question, right, about what he does specifically with his animals. And you just have to ask that kind of probing question, and then that's when you see his callousness comes out, and he would say something like, well, I eat the damn things, you know, which is quite a famous part of that debate, because we got him to admit that he doesn't just let them live out to old age, and, you know, he has their best interests in mind. He has his own interests in mind, you know, and getting him to admit to certain things like that, well, that's I think a very good outcome. Yeah.
What was the audience for that? Like, I don't know, the Australian media, was that like a morning show? Was that like some kind of like variety show, or was it TV?
It was just a YouTuber with a relatively small channel, wanted to put it together. He obviously knew what he was doing. He picked the right people, and he created a debate that got a lot of attention. And that was essentially it. He put some people together in his like kind of studio building that he's renting, and it was just an audience, and it was at nighttime, and they had all been drinking, so they were quite an intense audience.
Interesting.
It was quite a fun atmosphere in a sense. It kind of made it very entertaining, and I would love to do it again, honestly, because we actually did a different interview with that Dr. Anthony Chafee not that long ago. And that one didn't have an audience, and we actually did one with a lawyer as well in that scenario. And that one did have an audience, I believe. I could be wrong. it doesn't hit the same. There's something actually, despite being nervous and, you know, having more pressure of having an audience there, it actually can work in a favor because you can sense how people are reacting to the debate in person. And it adds a certain energy that is actually really good. And I think that's actually why I personally thrive in a public setting, public outreach setting, versus kind of face to face or without an audience or just a live, you know, via a call. There's something about being in person where you just put it. You would imagine there's more pressure, right? Especially,
Yeah.
you know, if you've got people watching, people could be filming themselves, but for me, I actually prefer that because there's no questioning it. There's no second guessing yourself. You just have to go with it. And for some reason, I work better in that situation. And I actually really enjoyed having the live audience.
Yeah, it definitely seems like you're in your element when you're doing your street outreach, especially. You've been releasing a lot of videos from the street lately. Yeah, they've been very interesting. And God, you get some of the most interesting, like I like I keep using the word trolls, but you get
Yeah.
trolls, a lot of
Yeah.
trolls, and
Yeah.
it's like you sometimes you get people that start seriously and like very like quickly like
Yes.
saunter off into trolldom. And
Yes, that's right.
yeah, and I think that's an indicator that you've made them uncomfortable. I know you probably don't know like percentages, things like that, but do you ever hear from these people who have been in these street debates that they come back around and say, "Hey, I thought about this more"?
Unfortunately, I don't actually hear from people that
Hmm.
often. I have got some cards printed that I haven't been handing out that I need to start handing out and for people to contact me, but people know where to find me. They often find the video. Um, yeah, look, I reckon a ballpark percentage is quite probably a low one if we're considering how many actually go vegan after our conversations, because that's never really the intended goal for someone to go vegan after a conversation with one person, even if you're the best outreacher. It's unlikely. I get them very close and I change their perspective on things, I think, very strongly, and I think I'm quite good at that. But that's not really the goal of the outreach. The outreach, the goal is to change their perspective, but to get them to go vegan is
Hmm.
often not the goal.
Right,
And the main one for me is the audience that are going to be watching on social media,
right,
getting
right.
to learn things, seeing things happen in conversation, seeing logic, two different types of logic go head to head and see which one comes out on top. People
Hmm.
are often still delusional and, you know, will side with the person that even said something completely illogical. It's that's an interesting phenomenon to witness in the comment sections. But um, yeah, the goal really is to get it out there for people to watch and learn about animal rights and see someone such as myself or other activists hold a very staunch view, but that is one based on just pure logic.
Right,
Um,
right.
so yeah.
Yeah, I mean the arguments hold up, obviously. Like I have found I've been vegan 7 years and watching content for all that time, debates, and I have never seen a good argument against veganism, never seen a good argument for what we do to animals. And I never will, because you and I know this, there isn't one. Um, and I I just I wonder these people who are watching this content, they're just like I understand in the moment feeling, put upon. Like you react defensively, you put up a defense mechanism. It's strange when people are doing that
Mm,
online in the comfort of their own home. They're getting worked up and defensive and but I guess that's just what happens.
yeah.
My I was confronted with earthlings and that's why I went vegan. So I
Yeah.
didn't have this like transitionary period. It was just bam, I've seen it, I'm done. You know, but had I first been approached by someone on the street, maybe I would have been kind of like some of these people. I'm not sure. I'd like to think I
Mm.
wasn't though. But what about you? Do you think like did you ever have someone talk to you like, well, what is your vegan story actually? Let's get
Yeah,
into that.
yeah. Well, I just went vegan after seeing some documentaries. I actually saw clips from Earthlings when I was young. I didn't know I was watching
Mhm,
Earthlings. It was literally just clips on like Facebook. I could have
mhm,
been like 11 even. And I found it very disturbing. It stuck with me. And my mum was vegetarian. and for pretty much all my life. Then one day, my sister, who was 4 years younger than me, maybe at the time, she was about 11. She actually came home from school saying that she was going vegan, probably based on a bit of just the trend. It was just, she maybe knew somebody that went vegan or saw it online, but she actually went vegan, and she's been vegan ever since. She turned my mum vegan, and that opened me up to it. My mum got me to watch certain documentaries, all the Kip Anderson ones actually on Netflix.
Yeah.
And I then actually watched a speech by James Aspey, his big one, probably his most well-known one. I forget the name of it, on YouTube, but that was one that really convinced me. Just seeing somebody similar demographic to me really have such a powerful speech was enough to just convince me. So that's really my story, and it was a transition over time. I wish I could say it was just boom, vegan overnight, but it really was certain things that I was considering and cutting out certain things, but I didn't fully get the animal rights strict message that, you're either really vegan or you're not, ethically speaking. And that kind of came later, but I got there. So that's my story. The question of would I have turned vegan if I spoke to myself back then or any other type of street outreacher? I again would probably say no, maybe no. I would say no. I wouldn't have. I don't know, but the reason I would say that is because the same reason I said what my actual goals are with my outreach is it's not often to turn somebody vegan. It's because you said people have barriers when they're talking to people. Their ego comes into it, and is there another outreacher that could have turned me vegan? People will probably point to somebody like Earthling Ed, who has the most calm demeanor when he's talking to people, very, very approachable. Don't know. It's all speculation. We don't know. We don't have studies on this as far as I know. But one thing I will say for sure, though, is the reason I really value my current approach and other activists that take a similar approach in terms of being very truthful and staunch about certain terminology and the way we convey the animal rights message. I'll say that's very important, and I've seen it with certain people on my social media. When some might say that our approach, like Tash and myself, is not respectful enough. We're not meeting people where they are enough. We're just essentially too staunch and aggressive in our method. And for some people that might be the case, but at the end of the day, we have to convey the message as we would want the message conveyed for ourselves if we were the victim. And that's using certain terminology, such as calling it murder, calling it abuse, and calling things rape when it's actually rape by definition, and not kind of walking on, I don't like to use the term, but eggshells. Because we have to be to the point. We can't get around it. And there are certain activists that I would be quite critical of that are too afraid to make somebody uncomfortable with their actions. And I think that whilst they might have an overall more comfortable conversation with that activist, they might walk away feeling like they weren't really personally challenged that deeply. Rather, their views were, and they had a to and fro. But look, I don't want to get into specifics, and because it's hard, I would have to pull up certain examples. But there are certain activists that take a bit more
apologetic approach.
Yeah, that's right. That's the word. That's the word.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
I agree with you 2000%. I think it's interesting, and you mentioned James Aspey. James was the first person I interviewed on my channel, and he actually credited you with changing his perspective. So that's really cool, because you said that James is basically, his speech is what made you go vegan. and here you have, like, years later or however long later, influenced him. And I think it was on terminology. I can't remember exactly what he said, but I think
he's mentioned this to me. I can't remember what it was.
I think it may have been like on calling animals it or something like that.
Yes, that's one of those. Yep.
Yeah, I remember a great discussion you had with Vegan Gains about that. Um,
Yep.
and that's great. Yeah, that was one of my favorite conversations, was the conversation you and Vegan Gains had. Because one, I could see that you guys were both in alignment on this, like holding people accountable and just like, like again, not apologizing, not walking on eggshells around the vegan message. Because I really have bought into the notion that I don't care if somebody walks away uncomfortable or makes someone
Oh
uncomfortable,
yeah,
because yeah, you've got to convey that this is an emergency and treat it like an emergency.
that's
And
right.
if you're not, then why would they walk away saying, "Oh, I should change this"? No, he said it was okay. Like he said, if I reduce my intake of animal products, that's a good step or something like that. No, you
Yes.
wouldn't. Like obviously that would be better than eating animals every day or something if you did it like one day a week, but we're not going to promote that message because we don't want you eating animals, period.
Yes.
Sorry, I just rambled there for a long time, but
No, no, that makes sense.
I'm glad you had that discussion with James though, and I'm glad he's mentioned that to you.
Yeah, that's a it's pretty awesome. Yeah, I talk with James. You know, we message and we've spoken, and yeah, we have a lot of respect for each other, and it's pretty amazing to have that full circle moment for me. It's a bizarre thing, very bizarre thing,
Oh yeah, I imagine.
to have him crediting me for something, which is pretty cool. But yeah, I think it is. I just think it's, to me, it always comes back to logic. Like, you know, you can take the example of calling animals it. Tash was the one that confronted me on that, but I
Mm,
changed my thoughts on it because, yeah, well, yeah, logic. It's just, it is something I would never refer to a human as an it. People sometimes do it for babies, but I would actually disagree with that now, in the sense that it's referred to an object, an
right.
inanimate object. It's just a fact, really.
Mm,
And I've confronted Richard on that, Vegan Gains, because uh, I don't know why he chooses to still hold that position. He doesn't really have a good argument for it. And I know, like, in the grand scheme of things, it's minor, but it is the it is the root of veganism, is the actual viewing of other sentient beings as objects. And I'm not saying that people that use the word it view them as objects inherently. It's just that that terminology conveys that definition, that message. And I
mhm,
really believe that something as simple as that has stemmed from this exploitative mindset that humans have had of animals, and that is the root of veganism, is the
mhm,
exploitative mindset we have, is removing that exploitative mindset we have of animals, seeing them as objects for our benefits. Um, and yeah, all these little things stem from that, and it takes time to actually undo the speciesism that we have from
yeah.
our childhood, and it's one step at a time. There are things that I'm learning every single day. There's things that Tash is learning every single day about terminology use, how you convey the message.
Mhm.
Very important stuff, I believe. And
Yeah.
yeah, and just to get back
Mhm,
to it, it really means that we cannot be apologetic. We just have to convey the message with absolute truth
mhm,
and
mhm.
confidence, but also understanding that we're not going to be right in everything and we're going to evolve. But when we're talking to non-vegans, it's just so important that we do that, because you can't be too worried about leaving a positive impression on them because we want them to
Mhm.
think highly of vegans. It's like,
Right.
well, I don't care how they think of us. I just care about what they're doing to animals, and I need to convey that message powerfully. And it means, sometimes you got to obviously be respectful, but if they're not being respectful back, well, you got to give it to them straight.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there's a certain kind of fine ground you have to walk there, but I
Yeah.
think it's very important that we're strong in our message and clear.
Yeah, I think the goal of activism is not to have fun, not to be liked. It's human nature to want to be liked, but that's
Mm,
not what we're there for. Yeah, I often say that. Like I've had this conversation with a friend of mine when we were talking about like disruptive protests and stuff, and some people's hesitation to do them. Now, I don't take to them. It's not natural for me. I don't like doing them, but I do them because I know they're necessary. But when for like, I won't call anybody out by name, but some people will go out there and put on a real weak showing, and I always think to myself, like, if I'm comfortable in this disruptive protest, then probably the whoever I'm protesting is also comfortable. And especially if it's a disruptive protest, like we don't necessarily want them to feel comfortable about this, because what they're doing to animals is horrific. And it's funny, like,
Mm,
so I like I like how when you talked about walking on eggshells, you were like, "Well, I don't like to say this because I mean that is like me and my friends' conversation like every day. We're because there's so many animal exploitation
yeah,
expressions that are
yeah,
just such a part of our lexicon that
yeah,
it's so hard to rid ourselves of it. But I agree with you. I think it is important. Um, I've had, like over the years, I've seen that PETA often will get made fun of when they try to like say, well, we shouldn't say kill two birds with one stone. Let's say, feed two birds with one scone or something. They get a
yeah.
lot of mocking for that. But as you said, it
That's a
is
good thing.
dismantling piece by
Yeah.
piece these subconscious things that are happening to us all the time. I wonder if these violent expressions towards animals really do impact how we think about animals. And they probably do. What do you
Yeah.
think about that?
Oh, for sure. I believe that there are many, many layers to speciesism and the exploitative mindset we have of animals. It it comes in so many ways, and I think all these little things add up and normalize it. And the role of an activist is to break down those social norms that we may not even think about, that are completely
Yeah.
subconscious to some extent. But that is our role, and that is inherently uncomfortable for the person that we are protesting or debating
Mhm.
or whatever. But also,
Yeah.
it's going to be uncomfortable for us as well, because yes, as humans, we kind of do want to be liked, and some
Hmm.
some people are much better at that. Like I said, Tash is just naturally more of a disagreeable person. She doesn't really care if she pisses somebody off a lot of the time. So some people
Right.
are better suited to that role. But that is the ultimate goal of anyone that considers themselves an activist, because we can do activism in any way. But fundamentally, you have to be disrupting a certain social or cultural norm, that
Hmm.
which being the exploitation of animals, or the viewing of animals in an exploitative way, seeing them as objects, as commodities for our personal benefit. Um, Something as simple as, say, walking on eggshells. It's a different one, because you might not be exploiting an animal. There could just be some eggshells lying around out in nature, and you can walk on those. And then that's not. I wouldn't say that's exploitative in any way. It's just, it obviously
Very true.
stems from, these sayings stem from the exploitative mindset we have of animals
Yeah.
generally.
It's just like when you think about how many of our expressions have to do with animals, it's kind of mind
Yeah.
boggling. Like, it's just such a part of how we
Oh,
talk.
even insults and derogatory and wording,
Right.
which is a very,
Right.
very, that's a more powerful one to, and negative one to consider. Like, if we're going to be calling somebody a pig, a
Hmm.
cow, that I believe is truly damaging towards animals
Hmm.
and animal rights, even though it can come out naturally. It
Yeah.
can, even as an activist, because we've just been raised that way. But that is one, because we are literally meaning that as an insult. And there is nothing wrong with being a pig. There is nothing wrong with being a cow, a chicken, a
Hmm.
dog. It's so obvious now.
Yeah.
It's like, how can we even see these words as insults? But it does come out naturally, for
You're
some
right.
people. Not for myself anymore, but I hope. But I don't blame people and activists that might accidentally say that,
Well, isn't
but it's something
ironic
to be
that
aware of.
the main animals that we exploit are often the words that we use to insult as well.
Yes, and there are certain words, certain animals that will be seen as a positive connotation, which often probably aren't the ones that are being exploited. To
Yeah.
call somebody a lion or a tiger or whatever,
Mm,
these kind of more free and powerful animals. It's
mm,
an interesting one, because it really depends. You call someone a monkey, it's not often a
mhm,
positive thing. It's got to do more with that particular animal. But yes, you're right. The ones that we actually exploit the most and have power and dominance over are often the ones that are used in insulting ways, which says a lot about how we morally see other sentient beings, and how we exploit them.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that conversation you did with Vegan Gains,
Mm,
I think that's a good example too of how I've seen you sort of evolving, because it seemed to me like what I was watching in real time was you not only trying to convey your points to Richard, but you were also very open. You seemed like a sponge. You were trying to learn.
mm,
And I've just noticed that it seems like you've gone on a lot of interview shows, and uh, I see, like, in the long term activists, it seems like a humility, like, of people who are
mm.
like willing to grow and learn. I've seen, like, for instance, like Joey Carbstrong. I watched him go on what's that guy's name? Ask Yourself. I watched him
Yep,
like get
yep, yep.
trained on how to debate, and I just see that in a lot of when we set our egos aside, and that's what I
Mm.
see with you. I see no ego, and you are the same guy that you're on the microphone as you are behind the scenes. You're very kind and thoughtful, and there just doesn't seem to be that ego, and I think that makes for good activism because you're willing to learn and grow. So kudos to you on that.
I appreciate you seeing that, and yes, I don't hold on to any particular views, perspectives wholeheartedly. I want to be challenged, and to be honest, if I was to speak to myself 3 4 years ago, I would challenge myself on many perspectives I had, and that's just because of we don't get a formal
Hmm.
education in veganism and animal rights. We just
Hmm.
don't. We're literally most of the time just kind of going off what other people say veganism is and what maybe this broad definition you might find on the internet says. But
Yeah.
really, it's a very deep topic, and but as time goes on, it actually the more you learn, the more simple it becomes, the much more
Right.
straightforward it is. If someone was to ask me, what does it mean to be a vegan 4 years ago? I don't really know what my answer would have been. It probably wouldn't have been a very good one, even though it's such a simple question and it's something any vegan should know. But really, it has changed. And I'm sure it's funny because it is such a simple thing. But really, as time has gone on, we become much more aware of what the most logical response to certain things are, things that add up on a whole. And people, I have to credit people like Richard for challenging me. And
Hmm.
initially, it does hurt, no
Hmm.
doubt. Especially coming from someone like him, he doesn't really have that filter. He doesn't care how he makes you feel, and that
Yeah.
that has its own pros and cons. But at the end of the day, he challenged me, and I opened to it. And I don't agree with everything he does say. I don't.
Hmm.
But when it came to certain things, I'm like, yes, that's just logical. I have to take that on. I have to get rid of my old mindset in that regard because that's just true. Um, I think that's the way we have to be as activists. We can't hold on to what we think is right. We just have to be challenged. We have to debate. We have to learn and go from there.
Yeah, which is interesting because, like, obviously going vegan, unless you're, I think, what, Nimai Delgado, I think, is like one of the only people I know who is like born vegetarian, vegan.
Yeah.
There's not that many of us. So we've all already had this kind of humbling moment where we're like, we've had to come to grips with we're doing something wrong. We need to change. And that is kind of a moment of humility. Over the years of your activism, uh, what are some of the things that you would say have been like great education for you? And where I started with that question is one of the things I've been doing with my conversations with people lately is towards the end, I've been asking if they have book recommendations, that sort of thing,
Mm.
in or outside of the animal rights movement. Just as it's interesting, I think, to know what people read, that sort of thing. But beyond reading, too, just like, people, experiences. I know Tash,
Mm.
I'm sure you would credit Tash with a lot. Um, but yeah, what are some of those things for you over the
Yeah.
years?
Well, no, you're right. I would credit Tash with the vast majority of it, and actually,
Mhm.
she would probably credit myself too. We challenge each other, and we talk about things all the time, so we're in a very beneficial situation in that regard. Yeah, others, all the main activists, as you would imagine. I mean,
Mhm.
I learnt just by watching all the best online. Joey, James, Ed,
Mhm.
Wayne, all of those people. There's you can't name them all. It's just we just absorb it all. Obviously,
Right.
books. Not many that are actually animal rights or vegan-based books. Yeah, not enough. Not enough. I want to look into more. To be honest, I would say that I actually credit just learning some of the Buddhist philosophy over the years just out of
Interesting.
genuine interest. It's funny how much it coincides, like the actual true teachings, the most fundamental teachings, not kind of getting into any of the kind of there are some aspects of any type of spiritual teachings that might not really be grounded in any type of reality, but Buddhism kind of stands out as one that really does have a lot of these core principles that, well, actually what I will say is that most, well, I won't speak for most religions, but definitely with Buddhism, the actual core principles 100% aligned with veganism if followed accurately. So there are a lot of hypocrite Buddhists, honestly. Even the Dalai Lama is a hypocrite when it comes to his exploitation of animals. So yeah, to be all I'm saying there is I actually have learned a lot there in terms of how to hold myself within this world, how to approach other people, how to approach my work, how to approach my mindset, the way I speak to people. I'm actually always kind of referencing the fundamental Buddhist teachings, such as like the what's it called, the Eightfold Pathway to Enlightenment. Not that I'm chasing enlightenment or anything like that. I think that's something that all humans should consider, but whatever that means, it's more so just the actual fundamental teachings are just so basic, and you don't have to get it from Buddhism. It's just that it's just it's structured in a way that I actually can look, it talks about like right view, right speech, right livelihood, right concentration, right. Well, there's the whole the 8 paths, and it talks about suffering. That's the fundamental teaching, is that life is inherently suffering, and it's about how we navigate that and use the pathway to get above that suffering and not associate with it and identify with that and actually help end suffering in the world. And whilst veganism isn't about ending suffering, it's about ending exploitation. Suffering is inherently linked to that anyway. So there's so many kind of correlations between the two. So I actually find myself going back to Buddhism a lot to get some inspiration and grounding.
Yeah. Do you consider yourself a Buddhist?
No, I wouldn't say so. That I don't know what it would actually mean to be to actually fully consider yourself a Buddhist, and I'm not interested in that anyway. Like I don't think that means anything. I think there's a lot of teachings I would get from it that I think are very, very valuable. But no, I'm not like a practicing Buddhist. Though it's interesting. If I had to like, for whatever reason, if I had to give up activism or I lost all my possessions, I would probably become a pseudo monk.
Oh, nice.
I feel like that's kind of like it's the only thing that really makes sense to me. Is like really finding peace and detachment from all the things that that gives us suffering in life. I just don't believe. I feel like there's a way around it, and I think really it means just letting go of all of that. And if that means becoming a pseudo monk, I would never say I was a monk, but it's just kind of living that lifestyle that I think just makes complete sense.
Yeah.
But I'm taking my mission is activism and speaking up for animals, and I can't imagine myself doing anything else. Even if I had to do other things for financial reasons, I think I'm always going to be an activist. And I always fall back on those teachings because they align so well, and I think it just helps me personally. So going back on your question, that's really it. Like I don't actually, I think it's a very simple thing. And it's just about surrounding yourself with the right people and coming in at the right mindset. Don't hold on to any particular viewpoint, because that will change, and you need to continue learning and growing and finding ways to get the message out there. And
well, so it sounds like your philosophy is sort of like staying open-minded and not boxing yourself in. That's interesting. I believe, like, Wayne considers himself to be a Buddhist. That would be an interesting conversation for y'all to have. I don't know if y'all got into it during the conversation you had.
No, we
I can't
didn't
remember.
exactly. He asked me about it and I mentioned it a little bit.
Oh yeah.
But no, we didn't get into it too much. Yeah. So that would be interesting.
Yeah, and I think we had Peter Singer on, and he had just written a book about Buddhism called The Buddhist and the Ethicist, I believe. I hope I'm saying that right. And I was hoping that Wayne was going to talk to him some about Buddhism because I was interested. I don't know much about it myself. I have an interest in Chinese literature, though, and a lot of that ancient Chinese literature, Taoism and Buddhism is really fundamental to the stories. These are mostly just stories, but yeah, I find that there's like a kind of a beauty in it. And I think it was David Rams who he was doing those call out videos about Sadhguru.
Yeah.
And in doing so, he also led me to Thich Nhat Hanh, which some of his speakings, which wasn't a lot on veganism, but it was just very beautiful how he talked about it.
He's the best. Yeah, he's the best in regards of linking, because I'm pretty sure, as far as I can tell, that he was an actual vegan.
Yeah, he
not
was.
just didn't eat animals, but still viewed them in an exploitive mindset. No, he was very much about non-exploitation and stuff like that. So I think he's probably the best example of a living Buddhist that actually is truly a vegan with a mindset around non-exploitation. But what I will say is that
he did pass, unfortunately.
Yes,
no, I was just going to say, he passed away. But yeah, there are videos where like there was like a young German boy who asked him during a talk why vegan and not vegetarian, and he actually even mentioned films. He was like, there are films you can watch. And that was really cool to see. Sorry, I interrupted you.
And it's, I don't think, and the reason I wouldn't consider myself an actual Buddhist is because I don't think we need the actual dogma. I just think that these spiritual practices just are just kind of more structured ways of investigating what ethics is and what morality actually is. And I think it really boils down to it being quite simple, and it's really about non-exploitation and non-violence as far as possible, except for in the case of self-defense and defense of others. And I think that's something that I found interesting watching Wayne's conversations, especially with Richard, is that I would definitely challenge Wayne on some of his viewpoints around violence. Now, and that's something that I've evolved in over time, that, I might have just defaulted to say that veganism is a non-violent movement. It's non-violence strictly and purely. That has changed for me, and actually listening to those conversations have changed me and enlightened me on certain things that are. But I just find all these areas quite interesting. But yeah, I just think that fundamentally it's one based on logic, and it's constantly evolving, and the way and it requires conversation, and investigating what's happening in the real world. And but yeah, I think that's
Well, I will say Wayne really thrives on the disagreements. He enjoys that for the channel. And so you should definitely reach out, maybe try to have those conversations with him. We have had multiple discussions on his channel about violence, and sometimes it gets us into territory. Like, for instance, we're unsure about like getting community strikes, whether or not we're allowed to discuss certain things. And being new to the channel, and by the way, I'm not scheduling on Wayne's channel currently. Like, I've kind of stepped back and let others do that. So but while I was we were getting into a lot of discussions about that. And that sometimes, like, I can't remember if I was still doing this when you were having the conversation with Wayne, but I would be sometimes chatting to Wayne during the conversations. I think I was no longer doing that maybe when you were on, but I was he would never listen to me. So I couldn't hear the conversation at all. But yeah, no, that would be a fun conversation to have. And I actually agree with you. I would challenge him, and have challenged him on some of his views that he's expressed during, especially the conversations with Richard. Partly that is because I consume so much of Vegan Gains' content. So I've really probably just like inherently adopted some of his views just because I've watched so much of him.
Yeah,
It's the benefits
and yeah, and
proving it.
that's right. I don't like I said earlier, I don't agree with everything Richard says, but I just
Yeah.
found that particular conversation very interesting, and I think it was a pretty strong case of Wayne holding on to a view, just
Mm,
holding on to it for the sake of it. That's what I saw at the end of it. I just really felt that he was just trying to hold on to it, even to myself and Tash, just being like, that should be obvious to me. I think
mhm.
that's obvious. But for him, I think he's held on to it for such a long time, or he has particular
Mm,
reasons. And I'm not saying that he's wrong or right, but just my inclination was that
yeah.
that's a case where maybe we're actually holding on to a particular
Yeah. Yeah.
mindset about how we perceive what veganism is, for example, and not letting go of that, or
Yeah. One thing, and I'll have to link to this conversation so that people can know what we're talking about.
yeah,
But I thought one thing that was really interesting in seeing Vegan Gains and Wayne go back and forth is that they are both, I would say, fairly impressively consistent with their viewpoint. And with Wayne,
yes,
it's
yes,
like he comes to believe that all violence is wrong. In many cases, even in the case of self-defense. Um, and he's sort of consistent with that, and it leads to these kind of, in my opinion, kind of weird places. And then
yes,
with Richard, it leads to uncomfortable places, but to me it seems like a little more consistent with what our stated values are.
yeah,
But yeah, for instance, like when Richard was delving into whether or not culling wild predators was the right thing to do, that was a topic that I thought was so anathema to our movement and
so did I.
destructive. Yeah, and I have evolved on that, at
Yeah.
least in principle, not necessarily in like how I would live my life.
This sound like I'm in the exact same position as you. I found that very uncomfortable. I still find it very uncomfortable, but
Yeah.
logically speaking, I am yet to find a good argument against it. I
Hmm.
wouldn't go out and do it myself, and nor would Richard by the sounds of it. He doesn't want to do it himself either, but just on principle, we have to accept when something is starting to add up. And I'm not saying we have all the answers on this at all, but
Yeah.
like, we have to be, consistency matters. And if it's consistent with with veganism, which that's exactly what we're advocating for in animal rights. Well, yeah, we have to go to these uncomfortable places.
Right.
So you're right. I found that was a good example of the conversation where if where non-violence doesn't actually always add up, because if it's going to result in more animal rights violations, if it's going to result in more violence, well, that's the antithesis of veganism and animal rights, I would say. And even just going back on Thich Nhat Hanh, I actually recently watched a video where he was questioned on self-defense and using violence in these situations, and I would say I have a similar belief to him, which is it's always a last resort, and we need to think of everything we can to
Mm.
avoid it. But fundamentally, we are going to sometimes be in situations where we have to defend ourselves, and it's about doing it in the best way possible that minimizes harms, but also removes the potential harm and violence. And violence as a last resort will sometimes have to end violence or prevent more violence. I just believe that is unfortunately the fundamental truth right now. Like it really is. But
Yeah.
I guess that's an interesting, that could be an interesting view to challenge Wayne on in another conversation. But
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think he was sort of backed in a corner in some ways when you just brought up like the case of someone, I can't remember if it was Richard, probably was Richard, brought up the case of like, if someone entered your house and was going to kill your dog, and the only way that you could stop them was to do this, like he did concede that, yeah, of course I would do that, but he's just saying like, I don't really accept that as like what the situation would be. He's basically,
sure,
and he doesn't run from hypotheticals, but I think
yeah,
he would even admit that he was kind of like pushing the hypothetical away.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, he gets into it's pretty interesting conversation pieces
oh, absolutely.
with Wang. Yeah,
And it's a conversation I think we need to be having. It can
yeah,
be uncomfortable, but I'm not meaning this in any negative way towards Wayne or even Richard in other ways. It's just so important that we have these conversations, because I wasn't thinking like this before watching that conversation or listening to
Yeah.
certain things that Richard has said in the past. Like, it's so important. It's so
Yeah,
important.
yeah. What do you think about? I'm sure you've seen like Humane Hancock doing a lot of talking
Mm.
about wild animal suffering. Is that something you've thought much about, or are you starting to think about it more?
I haven't thought a lot about it. Like,
Mm,
it's not like, I don't know. I don't truly understand his viewpoint on it well enough, because I haven't listened to it enough. Only to the extent that we have kind of just briefly spoken about it, and I understand Richard's viewpoint on it and stuff like that. And yeah, of course, I do see wild animal suffering as a legitimate issue. And I think the reason we are just focusing on the animals that we are kind of forcibly exploiting ourselves and the suffering that we're inflicting, is because it's something that should be able to end, like, practically it should be able to end fairly easily, like that's
mhm.
the case. With wild animal suffering, it's a lot more complicated. I would say it's not as straightforward as no longer paying for it anymore. There's a lot more nuances there, and it's on an actually, I don't know the numbers from what I've heard. It's potentially on a much larger scale as well. So that's an interesting thing, but that's why I think it always does come back down to veganism really being about exploitation.
Mhm, mhm,
But I don't really, yeah, I don't know enough. I don't know enough, so I don't really want to comment on wild animal suffering and really what my
mhm.
specific views on it are. But I do see it as a legitimate issue, but
Yeah,
just
yeah,
not as straightforward as what it is in the human context and what we're doing. It's as simple as not doing it anymore. And I know there's obviously nuances there as well, but really, that's what it comes down to.
yeah. I'm pretty much the same as you. Like I don't give it much thought. I've just found it interesting that he's focused so much of his attention on it, and it was
Yes.
fresh on my mind because he had given a speech about it that he posted on YouTube maybe a week ago, something like that. And
Okay,
it
I'll
was
have
an
to check that
interesting
out.
talk. Yeah, it was interesting. And I think I did not finish it. I have to confess, it's almost like an hour long. But I do
Yeah.
think I got to a point where he was basically saying, so what am I advocating for? What am I saying we should do? And essentially he was saying, I think we basically need to invest some resources into looking into this more, studying
Yeah,
this
I think
more.
that's fair
Yeah,
enough. Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. Yeah. So you had mentioned, how, if you couldn't financially support yourself as an advocate, you might go into being a monk or something. But luckily, it seems like you have been able to financially support yourself, but you just had this recent blow. And I wonder if we can talk about it because we weren't able to talk about it before as the case was
Mm.
ongoing on Wayne's channel. But tell me a little bit about the lawsuit that you were dealing with and where that stands.
Yeah, so essentially, we just went through a litigation, regarding a vet clinic. Not going to go into the details of what exactly happened, because it's all a bit confusing in terms of what you're allowed to say and what. And I don't see the point going into the details at all, really, other than
Hmm.
the fact that we were unsuccessful in a litigation that began around 3 years ago. And yes, we owe lots of money, to put simply, hundreds of thousands. And
Hmm.
that's the place we're at right now. And we are now trying to find ways to deal with this situation.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, we've been prepared for a bad outcome for quite a while.
Hmm.
We prepared for it. But in terms of the finer details of it, I personally think it's absolutely crazy. The whole thing, all of it,
Hmm.
just disproportionate. I've learned a lot about the legal system and, like, the civil legal system, and just how bizarre I find that. Yeah, it's a whole other world, going through a lawsuit. But look, to put it simply, it's not. We've learned a little bit of what we can and can't do going forward, but at the end of the day, we're not changing our activism. We're going to be
Hmm.
doing the exact same stuff that we always do, just with a bit more knowledge of kind of like the finer deep areas and kind of maybe what we shouldn't do. And but really, it's not. it shouldn't change us. And yes, it's a big blow, the financial thing, but we're going day by day right now. It's hard to really foresee what the future is going to be. But regardless, we are expecting the worst. Tash and I have been talking about this a lot now. It's stressful, but we're just like, you know what? Even in the worst case scenario, all our money is taken from us. We're still in a much better situation than 99% of humans living on this earth, unfortunately. Like, just to say the least, like, we are just going to be okay. And we're going to find a way. We have a very strong support network, families, friends, the online community. Regardless of what happens, we're going to be okay, and we're always going to be activists. And me talking about the monk stuff before, meaning like I like having that in my mindset of knowing that there are monks living out there with literally nothing, living in a monastery. Not that I'm going to be doing that, but I think it's having those types of people in this world just really shows that, you got these people dedicating their lives to personal enlightenment, but also the enlightenment of all sentient beings.
Yeah.
Hopefully they're all vegan and being consistent in that, but and they're doing it with nothing, essentially nothing, but a support network really, and the most basic supplies and resources. And I just believe that as activists, we can be doing the same. We can be living minimally. And I'm not going to take away the actual hardships that will come with that. I'm very, very privileged, obviously, but I still believe if everything is stripped from us, that we can do the same work. We really can.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad that you're not backing down, because you and Tash have been through so much. I think that could have done in a lot of people. So it's a testament to your strength, and what I see is you guys help each other, you prop each other up, and I wonder, do you like this? I know this is not a world that you want to imagine, but in a world where you hadn't met Tash, like, how do you think this trajectory would have gone for you?
God knows. I really don't know. I really do not know. I was an activist. That's how we met, but I cannot imagine. I just don't know. Like it's a, I don't want to say a negative thought, because who knows how it could have went. It could have gone, I could have done something very similar in a different way. I could have still been an activist, but Tash really, in a good way, forced me into this life. And I continued, and I helped her down the trajectory she was going. And it's only allowed me to go down my own path. So that's just what fate was. And I'm very happy with it. And I don't see the point in questioning how it could have gone in another way, but it just went the way it did. And I'm, despite all the hardships, I wouldn't have it any other way. It's just I'm healthy. I'm happy. I'm not in prison, and even then you can try to think of ways to spin that where it's even a positive thing potentially. I think there's a positive way to spin anything. I'm meaning that quite loosely. I don't mean like there's obviously really, really bad stuff happening, but I just think that by positive, I mean there is a meaning behind it, and there is a way to interpret it with putting your ego aside. And I think that I just think that I've been extremely lucky, and to be working alongside Tash and go down the pathway I have gone down. And it's as simple as that. I really,
no, and I knew exactly what you meant when you were talking about prison and putting a positive spin on that. My proximity to Wayne and DXC, people in that movement and those groups, they're trying to use these cases, and in some cases prison sentences, to shed light on what's going on and to shed light on the absurdity of the situation. I'm hopeful that this lawsuit could hopefully do that for you as well, because it is such an absurd amount of money that you're being told to pay. And I mean, I hope that people can see that, like they can see that this is just a ridiculous thing. You're just a guy. Tash is just a woman. Just normal people who do extraordinary things. You're extraordinary people, but you are just people. And to ask someone, like, I mean, imagine the kinds of things that like would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that's what we're talking about here. It's ridiculous and absurd. I should say too, I should ask you, and you have not asked me to do this. I want to make that clear, but how can people support you? Are there ways like joining like your YouTube or anything like that, becoming members or donating somehow?
Yeah, well, I'm starting to find avenues myself in terms of how people can support me, and I can try to make my own personal living. Like so far, I've kind of just been working with Tash,
Hmm.
and but at the end of the day, I think I want to try and do it myself as well and have my avenues. But to put simply, I do have a Patreon. I'm not using it, but I do have a plan now to upload all of my unedited interviews. I have so many. Like when we go out and we film, I get back-to-back interviews now, and so many I'm probably not going to post as a main video. So because it might not be worth it, or the editing time for it might not be worth it. So I'm actually going to be uploading to my Patreon and YouTube members section just all of my interviews. And I'll do that for a small fee, so people can just go through and just watch all of it, learn from it, critique it. So that's going to be one way people can support me and get something out of it. The other one is I have a PayPal donation link that I'm going to start putting in all my descriptions if people want to do that. And that's really it at this point. I'm going to be trying to figure out ways for people to support me and actually give me an honest living. But at the end of the day, there are many ways that we can do it, but if people want to support me, they're the main ones.
Yeah. And I mean, so if you were to start posting unedited, and all the interviews that you wouldn't post as main, I would imagine, and I'm not trying to sell, I'm not trying to sell for you, but I'm just saying, I do think that you would probably get a lot from them, because if you're posting something to YouTube, like it's usually like the best content, the views that the ones that you're going to try to get clicks on. So if you're posting these other things, they may be the ones that are like more normal interactions that, because not everybody's going to have some teenagers running up trying to yell, "Are you Tash Peterson?" Like a lot of your videos get like it's just so many people running up on you like to do that. And that's
Yes.
not going to be most people's experience. They're going to have a very normal conversation.
Yes.
So yeah, they may gain something from that. And as we've talked about during this conversation, we do need to be constantly evolving, constantly learning. And the best way that I found to learn is, like you mentioned, to watch the best do it. You're someone who has a lot of experience. You've been doing this for years now. You've been growing all that time. You can like watch from the beginning and see how Jack has improved. He's really honed his craft, and that's a good way for people to gain in confidence, even if they're just talking to their friends and family, that sort of thing.
Yes.
I mean, it's really having a handle on the facts is the main thing, but seeing how people respond to certain approaches and that kind of thing it's like you can only learn it by watching it and then trying it yourself too.
Yes. Yeah. You got to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I think that's the goal in the near future, is to build my own personal brand online, and give people things that if they want to support me for a relatively small donation, I'm going to give back some content such as unedited interviews that they wouldn't have seen otherwise. And look, people can give me feedback and say, like, actually, look, no, you should post this on your main feed, because I might not have myself. I'll also maybe plan to do some kind of live streams that maybe can be for paid content, and I'm going to do some just for my main YouTube channel. But I would love to be able to go back and forth with other activists, and we can critique each other, or people can send through their outreach and I can review that. Certain things such as that, I think, could be some good ideas going forward, to try to extend on what I'm putting out in terms of content.
Yeah. Well, I've said it already, but I will say it again. I really appreciate what you've been doing. It's incredible. It really is. I'm not overstating that you've been able to take that much negativity and turn it into positivity and keep level-headed throughout the whole thing. It's really impressive. I wish your haters could see that in you, and hopefully one day they will. But yeah, thanks for just being willing to take it on and be one of those lightning rods along with your partner. It's just incredible. And you are reaching those people that a lot of us are struggling to reach, and you've been able to do it. So it's awesome. And So I would say that that's a pretty good wrapping point, but is there anything that we
Yeah.
didn't touch on that we should or
No, I mean, I think you've conducted an excellent interview. I think you're great at this, and I look forward to seeing all the videos you're going to be putting out in the future. And I appreciate all the kind words you just said. Then I think it's important to have these social networks and support with other activists because it can be a lonely world and isolating for
yeah,
vegans and activists. And I just really appreciate these interactions. And yeah, so I have nothing more to add, and I just
yeah.
really appreciated this conversation today.
Well, I really appreciate it. This is a very small channel. I'm always really impressed when people like who are have quite a lot of fame in the movement are willing to like come on this like baby channel of mine. And so I really appreciate that. And like I said before, um uh not everybody's interacted with you privately, but Jack is a very nice guy behind the scenes, very easy to work with. And I just am really moved by that. I like when I meet people in the movement who could have all the ego in the world, but they don't, so I appreciate that. So let's
Oh,
have
thanks,
another
man.
conversation sometime soon, and we'll do it again, and hopefully we can arrange that debate with Wayne, because I think that would be fun to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, thanks so much, Jeremy. It's been good.
All right, take care, Jack. All right, let me